Reports from Kenya say several people have been shot dead by police in Nairobi during protests against a new finance bill which is introducing new taxes. Some protesters broke through police cordons and entered the parliament buildings, starting a fire and vandalizing parts of the complex. Similar protests have been taking place in many parts of Kenya, including President William Ruto's hometown of Eldoret. We'll have more on that story in a moment, but Kenya is also getting involved in the increasingly chaotic situation in Haiti, where rival armed gangs are in charge of most of the capital, Port-au-Prince. That's forced hundreds of thousands of people to leave the city. Now, though, there is a sign of hope. About 400 police officers have arrived in Haiti from Kenya. They're the first batch of an international force aimed at restoring stability in the region. The mission is backed by the United Nations and the United States. But it is controversial. It's already been declared illegal by a court in Kenya. Kenya's President William Ruto spoke to the officers before they took off. With more on these stories, I'm joined now on the line from Nairobi by Arise Africa correspondent Mark Bichachi. Good to see you, Mark. Let's start with those protests. What's the latest on them? Because they resumed today and have turned deadly, haven't they?
Well, they've turned deadly. We have confirmed 10 dead people so far. The number is likely to rise, with reports just reaching me of semi-automatic gunfire being deployed in the capital of Nairobi. Then there is, of course, the infiltration of parliament by demonstrators. At the same time, they infiltrated the city hall, which is the seat of the county government of Nairobi. There is also been reports of burning down of offices of various members of parliament across the country. Charles, this is a rapidly developing situation, so many angles to cover, so many different calls, and I don't think anymore this country is at loggerheads with the finance bill. This is now citizens asking for the resignation of President Ruto. Indeed, the opposition party Azimio, which is a coalition of parties, has called for the resignation of President William Ruto. As we speak, we've got about another 23 minutes before the president addresses the nation. Many are talking about the fact that he may call for either martial law or a state of emergency. But again, parliament is not in session. The mace has been stolen. So we're talking about a country that is in deep flux and in a deep sense of unpredictability, Charles.
Well, I mean, that's quite extraordinary because, I mean, we clearly, the pictures we're seeing tells us that it's quite confrontational. The demonstrators saying they're going to totally shut down the country. Could this snowball into something bigger for President Ruto if he doesn't handle it carefully because the anger is so palpable?
Yes, indeed. Indeed, I would not say cool. I think it's already snowballing. It is in the infancy of the snowball. And the president really has to make some really tough decisions. He had indicated earlier that he's willing to talk to the protesters. Difficulty here being that the protesters do not have a singular leader. This particular protest seems to be a hydra with very many heads and very many people who are willing to join the demonstrations. So he does not have, this is not politically driven, so talking to the opposition is not necessarily going to answer the questions that Kenyans want to be answered. And the anger on the streets, based on the deaths that we've seen and the difficulties that Kenya is facing, is quite palpable. So this, Charles, is quite the quandary for the president. And I am miffed if not baffled, by how the president is actually going to be able to either contain the emotion and get back his credibility and his mandate from the people. It is quite the uphill task.
Indeed, and I understand the government has watered down the bill, but that doesn't seem to be enough for the protesters.
Well, it did, and initially it was the feeling of many that the protesters would have their ambitions met when the bill was watered down. But as happens with many of how these particular protests are happening, there are many lawyers, many economists, many professionals who are literally going through the document page by page and finding things that Kenyans will find unpalatable. And it has not been helped by the fact that there has been quite antagonistic talk between many members of parliament and the people across the country. So it's a question not only of broken telephone, but also the fact that they're not able to communicate with each other. And the government seems not to hear the people. And to quote one of the young people, said that they are already suicidal, so they are not afraid to die.
And of course, Mark, while tensions are ratcheting up at home, Kenya is trying to create peace abroad in Haiti. I mean, just remind us why Kenya is sending officers from its police force to Haiti.
Well, the thinking for the government at the time was, and this was a decision that was made many, many months back. The decision was met after a meeting between President Ruto and the American government, and they discussed the possibility of Kenya actually leading a force into Haiti. Now, it must be remembered that Kenya has indeed sent many forces across the globe to Yugoslavia, to different parts of Africa, including Somalia and the Congo. So this was not quite out of the character of Kenya. What was different was the fact that, one, the courts of Kenya ruled against it, and then two, the people of Kenya felt that Kenya is not being handled correctly, and they did not want these forces deployed. So whereas these two issues would ordinarily be different, but if you ask the ordinary Kenyan on the street today, they would tell you that they do not particularly support this particular move. And even though the government has given assurances that the forces that are going, and this is indeed true, that the forces that are going are specially trained, Kenyans feel as though that their brothers and sisters in uniform will come back in body bags. So it's a mixture of things, Charles. And Kenya has traditionally performed this role. It has largely pacified Somalia, if I was to give an example. But it is seemingly a question of the right thing in the wrong circumstance.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. Mark Bichachi is our Eyes Africa correspondent. He was talking to me there on the line from Nairobi.